In its simplest terms, biodiversity is the number of different species that call a particular area home. Biodiversity provides us with a number of services that are sometimes called ecological services. They provide us with food, they provide us with building materials, they filter our water and keep water clean, and in many cases, species perform functions that we haven't yet identified, and it's important to preserve these species, not only for the roles they play in supporting human lives, but also because they've evolved here for millions of years, we have the responsibility to make sure they stay here and they don't go extinct on our watch. So welcome back, everyone, to our third episode. In this episode, we'll focus on adaptations, how organisms are adapted to the challenges of making a living in various ecosystems and various ecological niches. We'll explore frogs in a wetland, we'll dissect some fish and learn about the various adaptations of fish and frogs to their respective habitats. So adaptation simply refers to how animals' bodies, how their physiological processes, how their behaviors help suit them to make a living in the ecological niche that they find themselves in. Sometimes it's hard to distinguish whether two things in different animals that look similar are the result of shared ancestry, they're closely related, or they just both happened to solve the same ecological problem. So in this case, the problem is flight. If animals can evolve the ability to fly, they're suddenly able to occupy ecological areas that all their competitors are unable to occupy. And so they're freed up from the competition of having to live life on the ground if they can get up there and catch flying insects, for example, or migrate long distances and therefore disperse more easily than things that have to walk and run. So a bird's wing made up of feathers and a bat's wing made up of finger bones might superficially lead someone to believe that bats and birds are more closely related, but in fact they're not. Humans, primates, and bats are closely related, and you can see that by the similarity in their forelimbs. So there's the bat's thumb right there. This is the bat's forearm right here, and when I unfold its wing, I'm holding onto the wrist, you can see 1, 2, 3, 4 finger bones, and the fifth one, the thumb, has this little claw. So if you look at my hand, thumb and 4 fingers, notice that the bat's wing is actually the bat's hand. The bird, exemplified by this blue-winged teal, the big brown bat, and this white admiral butterfly, they all fly, but they do so with wings that are have evolved from very different structures. The scaly moth wing, the feathery bird wing, and the membranous bat wing, they've evolved to meet the same habitat challenge, how to fly and occupy niches that until these animals evolved were previously unoccupied and therefore free from competition. And that's animal adaptation. So you can study animal adaptation on your own in any environment. We're going to follow some students as they go and catch some frogs and try to understand some of the adaptations that frogs have to living in aquatic environments.
Look! There's the frog. See, look. Its head. That's a jackpot frog. You can't catch it. Oh, look at the size of that frog. Wow. See the size of that thing? Yeah. Well, you go. I tried, but... There's one right there. Okay, ready?
Right there. It's super close. Do you see it, Jet?
Yeah. Oh, did I get it? I missed it.
Right. You did just 1 second. That's right here.
God. Oh, I got a frog.
Whenever a species adapts to something, it's whenever they change to try to be better at surviving in their environment. So for frogs, do frogs have webbed feet?
Yes.
Yes. Why do you think they have webbed feet? Yes?
To swim better.
To swim better. They can swim, they can push more water more quickly. Why are frogs green? Yes?
To camouflage themselves.
To camouflage, yep, because in the pond, as you guys saw, it's all green filled with algae and the frogs match pretty well. What about their eyes? Yes?
Yeah, the tops of them so you just pick it up.
Yep, so they can peek out and see. They don't have to put their whole body out. What about, do they hear? Can frogs hear anything?
Yes.
Yes, they can. So they can hear, yep, so they can hear what's going on. They can hear if one of you guys is sneaking up on them, trying to catch them.
I missed it.
Why do you think frogs have small front legs and big back legs? Yes.
It's the big back legs are to push themselves
Yep.
higher.
So they can spring. And they don't need long front arms because they only spring with their back legs, right? So the front ones might get in their way. Do they have long tongues or short tongues or any tongue at all? Why?
Long tongues, because when there's like a bug right there, they go.
Yep, they can stick it right out and catch it.
Close to the water. I know how to scare it away.
So now we're going to move back to the River Institute, where we're going to look at some fish that we've collected for research purposes, and we're going to explore some of the internal adaptations and external adaptations of fish. First of all, everyone know what kind of fish this is?
Pike.
It's a pike. These were living animals that we caught in the river. They're dead because we wanted to use them as scientific specimens. So treat them with respect. So we want to get the maximum amount of scientific information from these fish. So in case they haven't been weighed or measured when they were alive, we're going to measure them. We're going to weigh them. Then you're going to take a little piece of muscle that we're going to analyze for mercury. You're going to take it from the right side of the fish. First, make sure you can find all these external features.
It only has a soft dorsal fin, it looks like.
That's right, as opposed to this that has a spiny one and a soft one.
Yeah.
So one dorsal fin, yeah.
Caudal fin. Yes, it has a caudal fin right here.
Perculum is the gill cover, yeah. So that's good.
Lateral line with a lateral line, yeah. Looks like it's there.
Yeah, so that little thing that looks like it's got a little dotted line along its side, that's called the lateral line. What's the lateral line for?
Is that where you cut it open?
Well, it could be, but for the fish when it's alive, it's a sensory organ. One of the different things about the dorsal fin is it's only got one, whereas perch have two. What else is kind of different about its dorsal fin?
It's like way behind here.
That's right, it's really far back towards the tail, so it's... And what do you think that's an adaptation for?
Maybe for it doesn't come out of I don't know.
So one of the things about a dorsal fin that's placed way back there, close to the caudal fin, is it gives it lots of thrust from behind its body, so it's good at darting out really quickly at something. It's not good at sustained speeds, but it's good at bursts of speeds and lunging out at its prey. So we call predators like that, we call sit and wait predators. They sit in the weeds and they wait for prey and they dart out. Whereas other fish like sharks are not sit and wait predators, they cruise and cruise and cruise. And where's a dorsal fin on a shark?
In the middle.
Yeah, much closer to the middle of the back. So often you'll see big pointy mouths with sharp teeth coinciding with posteriorly placed dorsal fins. Next thing to do is turn it over so its belly is facing up. You're going to make an incision here, and I would go right from there to about there, and then I would cut up the sides, either side, it doesn't matter. Make a flap that you can kind of open. And yeah, you don't want to puncture all the organs because you want to be able to see. What's that shiny silvery thing?
What? Where?
Swim bladder.
Oh, you got that already?
Swim bladder, alright.
Right there.
I don't know that.
If any of you are anglers, if you go out fishing, one of the problems fish have when you pull them up from deep water is they have their swim bladders. Their swim bladders adjust to how buoyant they are, how much they float. And when they're in deep water, they have only a little bit of air, but when you rise quickly from underwater to the surface, if you're a fish, the air expands because there's less pressure, because you're not under so much water, and they can't swim properly. They float upside down. A lot of people think they're dying. They're not dying. They just can't orient properly. Some anglers think the best thing to do is to actually puncture the bladder, let the air out before you let the fish go. And we're doing some experiments to see whether fish survive best if you puncture the swim bladder. And you just take a little needle and you insert it through the side of the fish, puncture the bladder, see how close it is to the body wall, and you listen and you just hear psh as the air comes out the needle hole.
I popped it.
There you go.
Just like,
I can't touch it there.
it's like a balloon.
So fish with swim bladders are able to maintain neutral buoyancy. That means they can kind of stay put in one spot. They can stop moving and they won't float to the surface. They won't sink to the bottom. So one of the interesting activities you can do in a classroom with a group of students or on your own is when you find some specimens, and if you have access to some preserved collected specimens, you can use a specimen collection at a local institution like the St. Lawrence River Institute, or you can go and you can catch some invertebrates on your own, and you can observe them while they're alive. And if you look closely at different organisms, this particular one is a fish called a long-nosed gar. You can see the very, very long snout. You can see the serrated teeth. That's an adaptation, and it's probably fairly obvious to some of you already what that adaptation might be for. If you have a long snout with numerous very, very sharp, finely serrated teeth, that's obviously for gripping something slippery. So this is a predatory fish that would eat smaller species of fish. If we now look at something that's completely different, if I take this specimen out of a jar, most of you will quickly realize that this is a large insect. So very different and obviously unrelated, closely related anyway, to a fish. But if you look at some of its adaptations, if I unfold its front leg here, and it probably doesn't show up really, really well on camera, but as I run my fingers along the inside of this folded back front leg here, I can feel that it's very finely serrated, very similar in design to the mouth of this long-nosed gar. So like the long-nosed gar, this insect catches fish. So an interesting and fun activity you can do with any group of students or even on your own is go and collect some things, look at them carefully, see if you can figure out what various structures are adaptations for, then go to the internet or some library books or some field guides and see if you were correct. What you would be doing is going through the same sort of process that scientists would go through when they discover a new species for which there is no possibility of Googling it or looking it up the old-fashioned way in a field guide. And that's what biologists do when they discover new anatomical structures, new species, new behaviors, new ways of making a living for different groups of animals and plants.